Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your time this morning. As you know, my name is District Attorney Shalena Jones, and I'm accompanied here by members of my office, as well as the Director, Mike Sarhatt, of our Chatham County Counter Narcotics Team. We're here today to talk about a very important case that occurred in our community. We want to first alert the public about a conviction that was secured by our office last Friday, but also to tell you that this conviction could not have been secured without the hard work of the agents who work behind the scene, as well as the hard work that has taken place under the leadership of Director Mike Sarhatt. The case that was actually tried and the verdict returned on Friday was a case that was 3.5 years in the making. This case is special to our community, as every case is special to our community, but this one is particularly important, and that's why we asked you all to come here today. Today, we're going to be talking not just about the conviction, but about the use, distribution, and trafficking of a very dangerous illicit drug called fentanyl. To start, I'll give you some facts of the case. Director Sarhatt is going to give you information and details about the drug itself, its risk, and its exposure. But I'm going to start today by telling you about how this case came to our attention and the intensely. This past Friday, a Chatham County jury returned a verdict finding Ms. Tracy Agan guilty of trafficking in illegal drugs, trafficking in methamphetamine, the illegal use of a communication facility, and distributing fentanyl to Ms. April Races, and she was also convicted of her involuntary manslaughter. This conviction represents a sea change in the way that we prosecute drug cases here in Chatham County, especially as it relates to the dangerous drugs. For far too long, our system has focused on the over-prosecution of drug users and drug addicts, but this conviction marks our objective to make sure that we are finding, investigating, and prosecuting distributors and traffickers of all drugs, and that we are doing so with vigor, that we are dedicating our resources to the prosecution of these kinds of cases so that we can stop these illicit and dangerous drugs from flooding our communities and getting into the hands of our children and also causing death, as was done in this case. I would love to say that this conviction is a victory, but it's not, because it resulted in a homicide. If anything, it is a lesson. From our perspective, even one overdose death caused by fentanyl or any other kind of drug is one too many in this county. This prosecution is important because April Races will not be remembered as a drug user. That's not what she was in this case. She was a mother, a friend, and she was someone who had never met a stranger. She worked in the dental industry for a number of years. She loved her family, she loved her friends, she even loved her pets. She loved her community, and she was specifically known for smiling and laughter and spreading a bright light to people in this community. And what I want this community to know is that when you traffic drugs in Chatham County, you are affecting communities. There are children who have lost their parents. There are community members and employers who lost workers. There are people who lost friends. And if you think that you're going to traffic and distribute drugs in this county and profit off the death of people like April, you need to know that this district attorney's office, myself, my staff, and with the help of Director Sarhatt and his wonderful agents and all the resources that they put to their investigations, we are coming after you. You will not traffic and distribute illegal and illicit drugs in this county. It affects everyone, but most importantly, it affects our children. We want to thank Agent James Boger, who began the investigation, which would ultimately result in Tracy Agan's conviction. We want to thank all of the other agents who worked diligently behind the scenes to make this conviction possible. We expect to see more of these convictions in the coming years, and we'll continue to work to keep fentanyl and other dangerous drugs outside of our community. I am proud of the prosecutors who worked on this highly unusual case and brought it home to conviction. The case was tried by ADA Lyle Burnham, who is standing here with me, along with ADA Scott Harrison. We're very fortunate to have prosecutors who take these kinds of cases seriously and will see them through until the very end. And of course, convictions like these, which are critical to our community, could not have been done if we did not have a director so committed to the outreach and education to our community about the danger of these illicit drugs. And so now I'll turn this announcement over to Director Mike Sarhatt. Thank you, sir.
First of all, I want to thank all of you for coming today. This is an important message that needs to get out. This has been an extremely long process. So we started this process about 3.5 years ago. And, you know, there's a lot of people that I'd like to thank. You know, first off, you know, when we started this process, we asked the prosecuting attorney counsel to come down here and train my investigators. The district attorney's office basically was all in from the beginning, and so they attended that training. So I want to thank the PAC attorneys for coming down and taking the time to do that. Then we had to set up a protocol to put that in place with all the departments. So I want to thank all the chiefs and the sheriff for being supportive in how we handle these overdose deaths moving forward. So when you start this process 3.5 years ago, it was basically about the time that Tracy passed away. It was one of the first overdose deaths that my investigators responded to and started. So this process it's probably one of the more difficult investigations that my investigators have to do, and it's an even harder prosecution. So, you know, Lyle did just an unbelievable job. He was very masterful in the courtroom to get the, I sat in on part of it, so I personally want to thank him on how skillful he handled all this, especially being the first time around. You know, the purpose really of having this press conference is not to do a victory lap, okay? That's what this is not about. This is about letting, you know, so since we've started this process, there's been about 200 families in Chatham County alone that have lost one of their family members to an overdose death. And, you know, this is little solace to those 200 families or even to Tracy's family. This is more about putting the message out to the drug dealers that if you sell fentanyl or any drug that kills somebody, we're coming after you, and we're going to vigorously investigate it. We're learning as we go from the investigative standpoint, and they're extremely hard, and it takes a long time, obviously. And I think we learned a lot during the trial. So this might be the first, but it is not the last. And then I want to really thank my team and everybody at C&T, how proud I am of them and the relationship that we have with the district attorney's office. You know, if you have any questions, or Lily, would you like to say something? All right, if you have any questions, cut them loose.
Director, you both talk about how this process is, and I mean literally difficult to investigate the case, then bring it to trial. Why is it so difficult? What makes this so different than a typical case you would prosecute or investigate?
Well, a couple of things. From an investigative standpoint, and I'll let Lyle handle it from the prosecution standpoint. From an investigative standpoint, you know, just looking at basic numbers. I have 2 investigators that's all they do 24/7. They respond to these. So last year we had 86. And those weren't all the ones they responded to. So they responded to almost 100, okay? That's 50 for each one of them. And then they're handling 86 overdose investigations. So just the sheer number is difficult, all right? And then they're long investigations because there's a lot of technical and data that we utilize along the way, and it takes time to get that in, analyze it. You have to have, the resources to be able to do all that. And then the other thing that I want to say is, this is not like a murder investigation where typically you have one person say if they shot somebody and killed somebody. Well, there's only one person that pulled that trigger, okay? What we see in these investigations is normally the individual may have multiple sources of supply. So that complicates things. And I'm sure Lyle will talk about that. So, the quicker we can get, if we can get to the scene immediately, which is why we put these protocols in, and the departments are on board with that. So early on, you're getting in the flow of this. So, I think some of these investigations will speed up, but they're still very, very difficult.
And just to clarify on the last thing you said, you mean your officers getting to the...
Yeah, so typically, if somebody passes away, it's my understanding that a detective has to go to the scene, okay? Well, if that detective gets on the scene and gets any inkling that that's an overdose, from the scene, they are calling my investigators 24/7, and my investigators have been doing this long enough and have dealt with enough of them. They know whether, when they're talking to that detective, whether they need to launch right then and there. So, my two investigators are dealing with all those cases, plus phone calls at 2 o'clock in the morning and going. So, there's a lot going on there.
Mr. Burnett is going to finish answering that question.
From the prosecution side, these types of cases present unique challenges. One of the challenges that we deal with these types of cases are obviously a lot of the witnesses we need in these cases are members of the drug using community and the drug selling community. For instance, in this particular case, there was a witness we wanted to call. However, he had overdosed and passed away earlier this year, so he was not available for trial. So that's one of the unique difficulties dealing with these cases. Also, in addition, some of the other unique difficulties with these types of cases are the method in which is used to commit the homicide is not your typical one that you would think of with a homicide, such as a shooting or a stabbing or something of that nature. It deals more so with someone who is ingesting a controlled substance to their own detriment. We deal with certain aspects dealing with the jury pool about ideas about personal responsibility with drug use and how that is taken into account in a prosecution like this as well. So those are some of the other unique aspects. Sure. First name is Lyle, L-Y-L-E. Last name is Burnham, B as in boy, U-R-N as in Nancy, H-A-M as in Mickey Mouse.
Well, first and always, the first step we want to take is making sure that we educate our communities about the risk of fentanyl exposure and how easy it is to suffer a death, an accidental death, or even an overdose death. Fentanyl, unlike most drugs, you don't even have to be the person who ingests it. You can be close to it. We've had a lot of officers who were injured at the scene, not just here, but across the nation, because during the investigation, they came in contact with fentanyl and didn't know it. Fentanyl, although it's not always used in its primary form, is often cut into a lot of other drugs like heroin or pills or ecstasy. That's one of the other things that makes these kinds of cases hard to investigate, because we have to get experts up front at the top to do autopsies and to be very specific about the cause of death and how this drug actually came into the user's possession. And so what we learned is that we can take different, more aggressive tactical approaches to investigating these kinds of cases on the front end, right? By getting our medical experts and chemists involved and determining the cause of death, et cetera, so that we can actually get an actual homicide or death conviction at trial. So those are just some of the things that we learned. I want to also stress the fact that this is our first conviction of its type. There was a lot of pre-work and collaborative effort that went on before this case, and we will continue not just to collaborate on investigations, but to work with CNT and all of their projects where they go out into the community and they teach our children and our school children and teachers and counselors about the danger of this drug. I always believe that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. By the time we lose someone to a fentanyl overdose death, or an overdose death of any kind, it's way too late. And so now one of the things we know is that early education, early prevention, sharpening tools for our investigation is going to help us get our arms around these particular kinds of cases. They're not just happening in California and LA with rich people. They're happening right here amongst our citizens in Chatham County. And so we want to bring our resources to bear in handling them well.
What made this case unique? I mean, there's plenty of overdose. And prosecute cases similar to this one.
So we have numerous cases that we're looking at on a daily basis. We have at least one case, two cases already indicted. Don't know the details on that, and so those are moving forward. In any case or any investigation, we're gonna, from the C&T side, we're gonna put that all together, and then just common sense will tell you, yeah, I think we got this one. And so then we take it down to the district attorney's office, and we go through 1 to maybe 2 or 3 rounds of that vetted. We go and sit down with, they have like a little panel, a little group, and we go, here's the information, here's the evidence, and then like, I think we need to close the loophole here, we need to do this, a little more investigation, and then my folks come back and we fire up and keep, whatever. So, if we don't have enough to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, then we're not going to be able to move forward on some of these cases. Does that make sense?
Yeah, has that happened?
Yeah, I'd like to answer your question also from a prosecutorial standpoint. What makes this case most significant is that this was the first fentanyl overdose case that came into the office 3.5 years ago when I was in office. The second thing that makes it unique is that it's very hard to prosecute these types of cases because the distributors and the people who are making fentanyl are far removed. A lot of them aren't even in Chatham County. So we have to follow the trail. And this case, we could prove, and the jury agreed with us, that the death resulted from a sale of fentanyl to this particular person. And that's what's usually the hardest thing to prove. You have to have that evidence, and you have to be able to establish that link and that chain. And so again, to echo the words of Director Sarhatt, it does take a lot of investigation, but that's why this is the first case and why we chose to prosecute this case in this manner.
How many times has CNT brought forth a case to the DA's office where it was determined that maybe you weren't able to prove that reasonable doubt? Has that happened before?
Well, I don't think that we've brought one per se. The district attorney's office has ADAs assigned to us, and we have a group of ADAs downtown that are handling, are part of the brain trust from the legal side and the prosecution side that will bring these to. And so, there are times on a couple cases where we're close, and they're like, guys, I don't think we have it, we can't go. Every one of these investigations we leave open because you never know when we're going to come up with another witness or some other evidence in a different drug case, and then we end up finding somebody, and then before you know it, it's like, voila, there's the final piece to the puzzle. All right? So I don't necessarily think that there's been an overdose death that we've investigated in the last couple of years that the answer was no. It was, we just need more.
Thank you, Director. And just to speak a little bit more to that, you know, about 3.5 years ago, shortly after this district attorney came into office, we set up a model and a working relationship with the Savannah Police Department and the other jurisdictions in Chatham County, where our major crimes detectives would meet very early on in cases with the investigators assigned from law enforcement agencies. Drew, I think I've talked to you about that specifically before. And in those instances, it's a collaborative effort. There's not necessarily a situation where we're saying no. It's a situation where we're looking at the case, we're looking at the evidence, the facts, we're looking at things, leads that could be chased down that have not been, and we're all collaborating together. You know, prosecution and law enforcement, it's not that you're dealing with a lawyer that's above an investigator. Everybody has a different role. Everybody's on a team. So everybody's a part in that team, and we replicated that same model that was put in place by the DA 3 years ago to dealing with these CNT overdose cases. So I believe on December 18th, we're meeting again on a upcoming case that CNT is going to present. And essentially, we sit down in the room, we hear the facts of the case, and everyone discusses as a panel how to bring that case home and how to prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt. And it's not a no at the end of the day. It's a continued work, and there's several cases in the pipeline that we're continuing to work on.
So let's talk about those several cases. You've said since Ms. If I'm mispronouncing it, Ms. Racy's death, there have been, what, 200 overdoses? Is that what I heard someone saying? How many overdoses have happened since this?
I think the first year we started collecting stats, we were in the high 40s, and then we got the process in place which allowed us to better collect some data. And so last year we had 86. This year we had 46. So I think there's probably been about 200 families in the county. There's a good chance that there's more, because really the only way that C&T gets notified and we get this in the loop is if someone passes away and the detective that shows on the scene contacts us. There are a lot of people that EMS does a pretty damn good job, that they show up, revive that person, get them to the hospital, and they may pass away at the hospital. We don't know those numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Do y'all talk to those, I don't know if the right word is victim, but do you talk to those folks who did overdose, then EMS uses Narcan, revives them, gets them back? Do you talk with them?
When we have the time to get active on an investigation rather than historical, which is what a lot of these overdose. So there's a lot going on here, guys. So one of the things that we are doing is we are actively bumping fentanyl information and investigations to the top of the list. Okay? So there's more than one way to skin a cat. Sorry. Or more than one way of getting something done. Okay? So if we can't, while we're doing the overdose investigations, if we've identified a drug dealer, then we have the TAC teams doing active investigations on that while our OD investigators are trying to work the death of that individual.
You got a bunch of pots on the stove at the same time.
We got to hit them any which way we can hit them.
Yes, he's right, and I echo his comments. From a prosecutor's standpoint, if we do have a victim who has overdosed and actually has been revived, and we can get information, that person becomes a critical witness in our case, because we want to know where they got the drugs from, what they know about the person who's selling, etc. Because we're not putting emphasis on the drug user in these particular cases. We want to get the distributors and those people responsible for bringing these drugs into our community. So absolutely, where that person is willing to cooperate with the prosecution, absolutely. There are things about drug use and the drug culture that make that difficult, as you can imagine. Because people in those positions are really reluctant to come forth and to talk to prosecutors, even if it happened to them. Also, this means that this person has to risk becoming a star witness in the prosecution of the distributor once we find that person, right? So we always start there. Good prosecution dictates that we start there and see where it goes. Great question. Mr. Burnham?
Particularly with regards to this case, some of the evidence that was presented to a jury was that this case actually began as part of a CNT investigation into Ms. Agan for distributing fentanyl. During the course of that investigation, the CNT agents learned of Ms. April's passing from an overdose. They received information that drugs had come from Ms. Agan, and they began to, as Director Sarhatt talked about earlier, working different angles, including the active investigation into the distribution of the fentanyl and the historical investigation into Ms. April's death. Through the course of that investigation, some of the evidence that was presented to the jury was cell phone text messages from Ms. April to Ms. Agan showing that there were drug sales historically. Admitted on the witness stand that he had purchased drugs from Ms. Agan in the past as well, in addition to some other evidence for the jury and in medical examiner testimony, and of course chemical analysis of drugs found during the course of that investigation.
Now let me ask this, y'all talk about so much more work to do. You talk about the cases y'all got cooking right now. If you have an approximate number or exact number, how many cases are you either investigating or have indicted, or basically you're waiting to get to that trial point? How many approximately do you have in the works?
Well, I would say that we've got a couple that we've already got indicted. We've got this conviction here. And, last year we had 86 overdose deaths, and those are all active investigations because we're not shutting them down. And right now we've got 46 here. Some cases are more active than others. You would be really surprised at how evidence gets developed in a specific case, any case. We've received information from out of state that is going to allow us to probably charge somebody. If we don't charge them, they're going to charge them with felony murder, and none of that would have had taken place had the district attorney's office and CNT put this program in place so that we had that evidence and information already tucked away and set to go. So, we're not shutting anything down. And 200, there you go. So interesting you asked that. So the 46 that we have this year, and I don't have the statistics on all 200, okay, but I can tell you of those 46 that died this year, here's the takeaway, 12 of those overdose deaths, the only thing in the tox screen was cocaine and fentanyl. 4 or 5 of those, the only thing in there was methamphetamine and fentanyl. And then we've had a couple that have had fentanyl and xylazine.
So you're saying it's fentanyl the common denominator?
Fentanyl's the common denominator, and I get tired of saying the same stuff. You cannot trust what's on there. The drug dealers nowadays are poly drug dealers. They sell everything. We don't hit a door nowadays where we're not seizing 2 or 3 different kinds of drugs, pills, you name it, and they all store it in the same spot with the fentanyl. So not only do you have to worry about them actually lacing on purpose these other drugs, you have to worry about cross-contamination. Within the last 10 days, we had one of the deputies over to sheriff on taking in a prisoner, getting them searched, whatever, found something. It was a packet of something. They put their hands on it, walked over to set it down, and then passed out. Thank God that we had already put Narcan, had been able to get Narcan into the jail for the guards. They revived them and sent them on to EMS. That was last week. I don't know. I don't know. All I know is the guy found some drugs, and within seconds, he's like, I don't feel good, and then he passes out, and then Narcan revives him. So, you tell me.
Mr. Snyder, I want to get back to answer your question from the DA standpoint. What you need to know is that because we're working collaboratively, there are a number of fentanyl investigations that are still pending with CNT that have not been referred to our office for actual prosecution yet. We do have a number of fentanyl cases that are pending right now as to drug trafficking, but those do not involve fentanyl overdose deaths. And I'm glad you asked that question, because here's what's more important than that. The people who report overdose deaths and who are more likely to report those are actually the decedent's family. They know that their loved one was where they were, what they were doing in the last few days and hours leading up to their death. And so for that reason, we are also announcing to the community that if you are aware or believe that you have a loved one who has overdosed due to fentanyl, contact our office. You can send that information to info@ by those tips and that information to him as well. And the reason that's important is because I suspect that in this county there are a greater number of fentanyl overdose deaths than we even know about. And we need the community's help in bringing that to the attention of law enforcement so that those cases can be properly investigated and prosecuted.
So for both you and the what your message is to drug dealers here in Chatham County and beyond that are bringing it here to Chatham?
As your district attorney, I believe I said that before in my opening statements, but it bears repeating, and I'll say it again. If you and someone you know is distributing and trafficking fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, 8 balls, anything like that in this community, and we find out about it, I will make sure, as your district attorney, that you get prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and Director Sarhatt, I know, will use all of his agents and resources toward the same end. We're coming for you.
Madam DA, just to clarify something. So if I'm not mistaken, this agent was initially indicted on felony murder charges and convicted of involuntary manslaughter. Can you talk about the change in charge versus conviction carries a much lower minimum sentence, and what is your office will advocate for the judge to sentence this agent?
Well, that's a very complicated question. It's a legal question. And we did some research after the trial to talk to some of the jurors about why they did not convict on the felony murder charge. That has a lot to do with the findings that were in the medical report, I understand, and in the autopsy report. They had difficulty deciding the issue of probable cause in our favor. But I want the community to know that a conviction of involuntary manslaughter is still a murder conviction and a homicide conviction. And as the state, we first are working within our office to make sure that we do a better job educating members of the public and potential jurors about how death happens in this case. It's not the smoking gun that Mr. Burnham spoke about before in regular murders or shooting cases, right? So we need to get more sophisticated and pour more resources into educating the community about that, because those people will end up serving on Chatham County juries. We have to do that. But we also have to tighten up our presentation of autopsies and medical information. We're really, really proud of the fact that this involuntary manslaughter is still a homicide conviction, and it still carries a hefty sentence. And we'll be looking forward to seeing what the judge is going to rule and sentence on this case whenever that sentencing hearing date is set. Absolutely. The importance of community education around these issues can't be understated. And there are really 2 real reasons why community education is important. First, because we need to create awareness in our community that this is happening so that we can take preventative measures so that these kinds of deaths don't continue to happen. The second is also so that we can strengthen investigation and law enforcement to make sure that when they do happen, these kinds of cases are brought to justice. In the end, it's the families that suffer, and Ms. Racy's family in this particular case is no different. Of course, our hearts go out to them because this death was untimely and it didn't have to happen. And so yes, there is as much victim contact as we can allow, but you know, people think that a conviction solves everything. It helps, but that's part of the answer. That's part of the solution. Our communities are hurting. They need healing. They need counseling. They need information. They need to be undergirded. And that's how we get public safety, right? And so we need to reimagine prosecution and investigation to know that these cases and these lives and these stories, they don't end when a verdict is entered. As a community, the onus is on us to educate ourselves about these things, to make sure they don't happen again. And that's going to include rallying the families of the victims, as well as all of the other experts in the field.
If I could just add something to that. So, I totally agree with that, okay? And so much so that C&T partnered up with the recovery place, and because I felt there was a need to get the families some support. So we had a couple of families that we were dealing with, and we basically started a self-help support group that we're a part of, but it's run by them, and the recovery place does a great job. And I let them make the name of the group. It's called the Healing Hearts. They meet every third Thursday at the Peer Recovery Place on Abercorn. I don't have that number off the top of my head. And I try to attend every one of those meetings. They're extremely emotional. For me, being selfish, I go to those meetings because I get a little pissed off and I rejuvenate, and I got another month, okay, let's go get it. Let's get after it. So there are some avenues out there, you know, and I've seen these family members, you know, they're never going to get over it, but they do grow. And it's very obvious when a new family member comes in that just lost one compared to where the husband and wife are of a different, that have been there, what stage of grieving they are, because everybody grieves in different times. You know, the process might be the same, but the time in between those steps is different for everybody. So we have tried to put something in place for that.
Any further questions? Thank you for coming out. Thank you for your time today. God bless America. God bless Chatham County. Thank you. Be safe.